Hey second grade, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. Today we're continuing our series all about showing our feelings in our artwork. In last week's lesson we talked about Pablo Picasso's blue period and how sometimes expressing our sadness through our artwork can be a very important way to help us cope with and deal with the problems that we have in our lives. Today, we're moving on to talk about aggression. Not necessarily always anger, but sometimes just that pent-up feeling like, I just want to break. You know what I'm talking about? Well, Jackson Pollock sure knew that feeling really well. Jackson Pollock was an abstract expressionist painter. What's an Yeah, abstract expressionist. Let's break down those two words. Abstract means that his pictures weren't intended to look like a specific object, right? It's not supposed to be trees, it's not supposed to be houses or flowers or diamonds or dinosaurs or people. It's just stuff. And expressionism means he was trying to show his feelings through his abstract artwork. So that's what abstract expressionism means. Pictures that aren't of a specific thing, but that are just supposed to show your feelings. Sometimes Jackson Pollock dribbled his paint very calmly and slowly, and you see nice small little dribbles and splats. Other times he flung his paint as hard as he could and made ginormous, big kersplashes. If we were working on this in my classroom, I would set out a giant drop cloth on the floor, put our papers on it, and then start throwing paint at it. But since most of us are either working in a regular classroom or from home, we really don't want to make big messes like that. We're instead today going to take a look at the shapes that his different kinds of splotches took on, and how you can see, just from looking at these different shaped splotches, how he was really feeling when he made those different kinds of splotches. Now, if you have some paints that you want to play around with and try this out, just make sure you're doing it outside or on a drop cloth where you've got a big space that's allowed to get messy. And you might want to water down your paints a little bit so that they dribble and splat better. But if you don't have a play area that's allowed to get paint all over it, what we can do is we can look at the shapes and analyze what kinds of lines and shapes get made with different applications of this paint. So let's start with the calm little dribbles. If you're just pouring and dribbling the paint, you notice that in some areas it's a big thick line, like this big brown line that goes down. But then also it sometimes gets a little thinner depending on how much you're pouring at a time. And then sometimes it gets these lines of dots. So we can kind of try to mimic that and say, well, if it's a thicker line, then we want to draw, it's kind of like a ribbon. And then maybe it thins off and it would be rounded at the end, see? And then maybe would lead to some different sized dots trailing off. And then maybe even lead into another line. Maybe there's a splat where that first starts. Sometimes the splats, if we look like right here, you see there's like a big glop that kind of comes out at a different angle, right? So we could kind of change the shape there to have big glops coming out. These are very organic shapes, aren't they? And notice where I was really flinging the paintbrush and just, really shaking that paint out. You get lots of these spiky shapes. So it's kind of like a blobby shape that has long spiky tendrils that come out from it. And sometimes they have like a little spot at the end, and sometimes they kind of whip around and curve and change direction, right? And sometimes there's bigger glops and smaller glops. And so what we're going to try to do is just kind of draw out some of these different sized and different shaped paint glops and try to get that feeling of some of it be the calm, collected, just dribbles, nice, calm, smooth dribbles, and some of it be the flinging the paint at the page. Also notice where like one color went on top of another. You see how the colors kind of merge together in these big gloppy shapes? And there's also some little lines that I don't know if they'll show up on the camera, but they're very faint where the paint has kind of mixed. You might be able to see this line right here where the paint has kind of mixed a little bit and it spreads a little. So instead of just overlapping like this, I can kind of get some gloppy shapes where those paints are mixing and blending with each other as they overlap each other. And that's kind of fun. And sometimes when you're bringing like a brush or something, flinging it really hard, you get like an initial splat that's followed by a thinner line. So I might have like sort of a big roundish splat with some of these little glops coming out, but then followed by a nice smooth line after, something like that. And sometimes you have lines like this where it's like a thin line with these like bulges in the line. So what I'm going to do for that is kind of draw these parallel bumpy lines that when they they both bump out, so you got these big sort of bulges in the line. And let's not forget about color, because remember, the whole point here is to show that sort of aggressive feeling, which is kind of almost related to anger in a lot of ways. And so I used a lot of red, dark blackish colors, some browns that are kind of a reddish brown, very dark, menacing colors. So if we wanted to color our, drawing of splats, I would probably focus mostly on these kind of colors. I'm not going to use much in the way of cool colors, and I'm not going to use much in the way of soft colors. It's going to be dark, it's going to be reds and blacks and browns and menacing, creepy colors. And I also don't want to be light and soft and gentle with my colors like this, because if I'm shading softly like this, then it looks kind of pale and almost like an Easter color, and that's not what we want. We want it to be dark and creepy and menacing. And remember what I said earlier about when colors kind of overlap each other and how you can see little goopy lines that sort of, go through. So like if this was some black paint right here, then where it overlaps the red paint, it would kind of mix in with that, and we'd see some of that black blending in with the red. And if I'm using colored pencils like this, I can actually blend the colors together, put one on top of the other, and just make that a really dark red by putting some black under it and then coloring dark with the red. And then that can merge on into the black stripy splat as it moves out the other way. Anyway, you pick one way or the other, either draw it out or splat it out, whichever you have the ability to do. And really remember that the idea here is abstract expressionism. You're just trying to express some aggression and let some of that out. This has been a crazy year, 2020, with all these weird, just everything mess. Anything that could go wrong has gone wrong this year. So just let some of that feeling out. Just let your artwork express that. I think this year would have been a great year for Jackson Pollock. Well, that's it for today's discussion of Jackson Pollock's abstract expressionism. I hope you enjoyed this, and maybe if you get a chance sometime, you could practice acting like Jackson Pollock. Get a big drop cloth, lay some paper on it, and then just fling paint at it and see what happens. I recommend doing it outdoors, though, if you get a chance. Anyway, that's it for today. Next week, we're going to talk about how making vertical or very tall elements in your picture can make your picture feel more strong. Superman is going to be one of our examples, but not the only one. I can't wait to see you then.